You might have a question. You might have a story to tell that is pertinent and would make you a panelist in next year's summit. I am so excited that Lake County has a climate resiliency officer. Yeah. That is pretty transformational all by itself, and I know you're talking to other counties about how they can do the same. You want to riff on that a little bit?
Sure, I'd be pleased. My position was funded from a Cal OES Prepare California Jumpstart grant. I have spoken, apparently several counties throughout the state received this funding. Most have not been able to hire anyone. That I've spoken, well, like I said, with a couple of municipalities and counties about what I do, what the county did, and how they were able to recruit me. I think I mentioned at my introduction, it was a difficult decision because I didn't want to leave my job, but there were reasons that I wanted to be in this position. So as I understand it, the Prepare California Jumpstart Grant is going to be ongoing. So look for that particular funding. The crew at Cal OES are very, very helpful. So look for it.
Yeah, so I don't have a question so much, but maybe a reflection about, oh, I'm sorry. I'm Joanne Saccato. I use the pronoun she, her, and I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for Lake and Mendocino Counties for the NorCal for Health Project. That's one hat I wear. What I wanted to bring into the room is maybe the contractors are missing from this conversation. And then to also point out what happened to us in Lake County, because I live in the neighborhoods where the Valley Fire tore through, and we lost, I think, 50% of our housing in the Cobb Mountain area. Is that when the fire happened in Santa Rosa a year or two following, all the construction, not all the construction efforts, but a lot of the construction efforts in Lake County got pulled down to Sonoma County because they could pay a much higher premium to do the rebuild. So for those of us that live in rural, somewhat impoverished communities, there's a gap there for the rebuild. So just want to throw that in the room. And then just to assuage everybody's curiosity, I was backpacking in Yosemite, took a slip and fall, fractured my ankle, and I'm doing just fine. So.
Glad you're healing. All right, hustle on over to Carrie Venegas. And then I saw another hand. Oh, Susan. Pff, whatever.
Hi, thank you, panel. I'm Carrie Venegas. I am an NGO actually in Humboldt County and working with Nick as part of the long-term recovery group and through the support of the Humboldt Area Foundation. And I think some of the things you've mentioned are who's not here. And I feel like there's a lot more that we need to be talking to our public health and our physical health folks and our mental health folks. We all realize that recovery process is such a long-term event, and honestly, the construction piece is a lot of what we've been doing with the disaster case recovery management, but it's the human beings who are rebuilding and recovering, and a lot of what's gapping is what we know is already in short supply in our community, right, which is mental health supports and sometimes just health supports, period, and how we're helping people be resilient. Because if you've ever tried to vet 3 contractor bids and find a contractor who's open to put a foundation down or even install a toilet that's shot through the roof, you know that this is not going to, it's a marathon. And people are experiencing and living through this marathon. The other thing I'd actually like to ask you is, you know, one of the things that didn't get mentioned as a climate impact was actually the pandemic we all went through. And yet a lot of the research is saying that the health things that we're seeing, pandemics, migration of malaria, other things, we just had a little brief conversation about this during lunch. You know, these are really real things that are coming as disasters and may have already been experienced as disasters. What are your thoughts about addressing that as part of climate change's impact?
First, talking points to answer that question. No. The first thing that I would like to say is I'm trying to remember the phrase unfair advantage that was in that initial question. And the unfair advantage of COVID, read bonus opportunity that it offered us was that yet another stream of funding came down. And so we were able to respond in ways that we had not previously, as well as to increase collaborations. So in Lake County, for example, one response to COVID was that the Public Health, Behavioral Health Services, Department of Social Services, Adventist Health, for which I worked at the time, we were able to open another shelter for people experiencing homelessness, and then ultimately to take over a motel where we were able to house not just people who were impacted by COVID directly, but who had other social determinants of health that might have made them more vulnerable to COVID should they be exposed. And that sort of led me to thinking about your comment regarding resiliency, which right now many of our communities are working with the California Strategic Growth Council to build resilience centers. In Lake County, we have this giant lake in the center, so the idea that one center somewhere in the county would make sense as a hub for all those services is not realistic, but it is also not realistic to expect that all of the voices that have not felt in the room are going to feel comfortable going to one place, whether it's a government agency, a church, a nonprofit, or whatever. So one of the things that Terre and I have been working on together has been developing this resilience hub model where there is this one hub, and the purpose of that hub is to resource all the centers, which we want one in every single little tiny rural community in our entire county of 65,000 people. So in that sense, I think that you're right, some of those medical providers are not present in the same way that we were active in the pandemic. Since I worked for a hospital and was operating shelters throughout the pandemic, we thought about it all of the time. So yes, in those collaboratives, and then the other piece that I wanted to say, I do facilitate the COAD in Lake County, which has just restructured itself. And one of the applications for membership that came in yesterday was the director of maintenance at a post-acute center. And so I saw that at first and I thought, maintenance? Like the physical property? Like, why would he want to be in the COAD? And then I started thinking, why would he not want to be in the COAD? Why would the Chamber of Commerce not want to be in the COAD? Why wouldn't the hospitals want to be in the COAD? Who in our community is truly not impacted by pandemic, by disaster, by climate caused disaster? And so we do have to think outside of the box and add these extra dimensions into the questions where we haven't been. And I think we're doing better, which is not to say that we're wholly there yet. Did you want to answer that about the...
Okay. Two more. So my question was, I know in Trinity County, when you guys had some fires, they were massive. State came in, provided some support, but you didn't qualify for FEMA because we weren't big enough or rich enough. Again, in Rio Dell, not big enough, not rich enough, even though the impact on the community was massively huge. Part of that is, I'm sure, I think I heard Huffman is working on some policy change, maybe to change that. But the other, really, have you learned anything about how to quickly and effectively gather as much information about damages so that you can possibly make those, make that threshold over the times?
Yeah, I can tell you about our experiences in Trinity. Yeah, it's all about making a case for, why you need help. And there's a lot of kind of wonky stuff that goes into it as far as calculations and stuff. There are a number of factors that are considered both when you're asking for state aid or federal aid. And so state aid is California Disaster Assistance Act, and it's really just public assistance. So that's the stuff that I talked about for public infrastructure. There's no real individual assistance in state assistance. So, all disasters are based on the idea that, you're only going to get help if it exceeds your ability to respond. So when we go to the state and we say, hey, we have this disaster going on, and by the way, and I haven't talked about this, but there are some timelines associated with this. So every time we have a disaster that goes on, you have 10 days to proclaim a local emergency, and then you have, in our county at least, we have 7 days to have that proclamation, whether it's my boss or myself making it, 7 days for your board of supervisors or governing body to ratify that. And then you don't necessarily have to ask for assistance at that time, but you're kind of then on a timeline. And so what happens is we're always like, okay, do we proclaim or do we not proclaim? And sometimes we just proclaim because we think it's going to get bad, or sometimes we wait a little bit, but like I said, you always have that deadline in the back of your mind, because as soon as you say, yes, we need help, then you're on the hook. Okay, now you have to prove it. Why, show us why you need help. So the way you do that really is, first there's something called an initial damage estimate, which is really just kind of I don't want to say a swag, but it's kind of like a scientific wild ass guess, right? You're just kind of a big general estimate of how much damage you have. But then after that, whether it's going to the state or through the governor's office to the president, because the president is who makes a federal disaster declaration, you're going to have to engage in a preliminary damage assessment process, and that's going to be local folks plus somebody from COAD, somebody from FEMA, maybe somebody from SBA, Small Business Administration. So in the past, let's say before last year, so through Helena Fire and some other fires that we've had since then, August Complex, the Monument McFarland and River Complex in 21, where we've experienced damage, we have our Environmental Health Division in our county, which is really the team that goes out and does the damage assessment on residences, right? So if we lose residences, they're the ones that go out and determine how much damage was there. And up until recently, they were going out, and this is a team of, this is a staff of 5, because we're a small county, right? So this division, that's including the director and their administrative staff, so they don't have a huge team of people. But they're the ones that are really kind of going out in the field to do this damage assessment, and they've always done it on basically pen and paper. And then they come back to the office and they put it into a spreadsheet, and then they reach out to the assessor's office and they say, okay, here's all the properties that were damaged or destroyed or what have you. So they can calculate the damage, and that's where we start to get to, okay, here's what the level is, so that we can share that information with CalOES and potentially FEMA. So there are some new tools out there now that FEMA has, and if you want to go look for them, you can check their website, fema.gov. They have a tool that you can actually access on a mobile app, or there's some paper forms to do it, and it basically will collect all the information that ultimately, like, the state or FEMA is going to need on damage, because FEMA has a damage assessment guide, and you can look that up too, and it'll tell you all the categories. So you have basically everything from affected to minor, major, and that's how FEMA uses, that's what they use to determine the scale of the event. So we don't use the FEMA tools. We've actually gone to a private vendor that created a web-based system. We just brought on board roughly this time last year, and we haven't used it 100%, but we have been able to start putting into use. Most recently with the kind of late winter storms that everybody pretty much experienced, right? We had a lot of people in the county who got snowed in for days and days and had damage to their houses. So what this tool does is it allows us to preload all that stuff that I talked about that normally would be doing on the other end, which is like your assessor data. So, and we have all this stuff tied in GIS layers into this system so that our environmental health damage assessment team can go out in the field with a mobile device like a phone or a tablet. It doesn't matter if they have cellular connection, because it can work offline and they can upload this stuff later, but they can go out and they can do a damage assessment and click boxes and enter figures, and basically all that stuff can be pulled into this system, which will actually generate FEMA documentation for us. The other really cool thing is that it, and the reason we went with this versus the FEMA created option is that it also provides us in the Emergency Operations Center with pretty much real-time information about which structures have been damaged and what that damage looks like. We can see who the owner is, contact information, that kind of stuff. It also, and we used this in the storms earlier this year, it has a resident self-reporting feature, and so we can actually put a link out on our OES page so that residents can go in. And it's worked really well in the storms because there was so much snow that we weren't going to get there. And after the snow melted, then our road department had to go out and start working on road damage. So there were serious accessibility issues. But we started getting these damage reports from residences, and then once those areas were accessible, our damage assessment team could just go out and validate those reports. And then, we talked about kind of levels of assistance, and probably if you do get federal assistance, the most often type you're going to get most often is probably SBA, and that's usually in the form of disaster loans, low interest loans. And so actually just a couple months ago, SBA or CalOES reached out to us on behalf of SBA and said, hey, did you have any damage? The governor is asking the feds for help, but we need to know if this happened and if you have damage in your county. And so they said, and this is kind of, I don't know, maybe more information than you want, but to qualify for SBA, you typically have to have at least 25 damaged businesses or residences, and at least 40% of those uninsured. But for this, they kind of waive the rules. Oh, I'm sorry. Am I taking too long? Oh. Okay. But so basically, we were able to take that stuff out of our system, email it off to SBA, and then they actually took it upon themselves to reach out to each of those residences that had made a report so they could collect information needed to find out if they would qualify. So that's just one of the tools we brought on that will make our ability to access aid hopefully much faster.
Oh my God, Mike. So he has outed himself as a disasterologist. When I think about the scrambling that has happened in any of the disasters I've been connected to for simply that part of the work, trying to figure out the scale and scope of the economic impact of disaster, now we know who to call. Thank you, really, truly. I know that was a long response, but I found myself taking mental note over and over and over again. Thanks, Mike.
As you were talking, Terry and I were talking also. We didn't mean to be talking while you were talking, but you were causing us to think if we didn't want to lose track of this question. In January, I think you probably all experienced the atmospheric storm where it just felt like it was Noah's flood. My house, inside my house, it was raining. And, so Terry and I were I was like, who was I supposed to report it to? Our insurance agent said, yes, they would pay for it, but our insurance would go up, which, as we all talked about earlier today, is not really an option. So we emptied our savings account to fix the fact that it was raining inside of our house. So Terry's saying, well, you should have reported it. So I reported it to my coworkers so they would feel sorry for me every day. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I reported it to my coworkers, but who else could I have reported it to, right? And Terry is saying, you should have reported it to the county. Yeah. But there was not a vehicle to do that. And it goes back to this unfair advantage, because we were able to empty our savings to fix the fact that it was raining inside of our house. So we weren't subject to any of those other places. But by the fact of not reporting, it keeps us below the threshold, which if everybody did report, it might have brought us to that threshold of being able to access SBA loans, which, in a disaster, I feel like the most common thing I say to people is take the SBA loan. What folks don't realize often is it's really not just for businesses, it's for homeowners as well, and the interest rate is so low, you have a much better chance of avoiding falling into poverty after the disaster if you take advantage of some of those resources. So this question about scalability and access is really important, and we don't have the solution, but maybe it offers another conversation. And then the last thing I wanted to say, if you have not yet read the book, The Great Displacement, right now in the United States, we're having the largest migration of peoples, and it is caused by climate. It is climate-driven displacement. And so what that looks for our communities in terms of economic development, if we don't figure out how to do fire-adapted housing, we will continue to have people leaving our communities, thereby weakening our ability to be resilient in that next disaster, which is not a question of if, but when.
I'm Natalie Arroyo with Humboldt County Supervisor for District 4 there. And as a decision maker in Humboldt, I have a question around biomass for the biomass enthusiasts. So I know that's Clarke and maybe Eric and others. And so one thing I'm grappling with, and I'll try to say this as succinctly and as in normal people speak as possible. One thing I'm grappling with is the information that is out there and has come to me around burning wood for energy and for heat, and the CO2 implications of that, and some of the smoke and public health implications of that. And so I know that catastrophic wildfires are also very bad, and we could be managing our forests better. But how do we use that wood waste in ways that are healthy and productive and get us moving in the right direction when it comes to our climate? And, you know, a lot of our rural counties, people are relying on wood for all kinds of stuff. So how can we do better with that? What are some of your thoughts that you'd love this group to know, and how can we advocate for that?
Well, let me just say one thing before he does, because I know he can go on, is to look for the technology that is, you know, if you're looking for bioenergy, biochar production, look for technology that is a closed chamber, that has no particulate emissions. The tribe that I worked for before is bringing that to market. There's more out there. I'm not saying they're the only ones, but the technology exists, so you don't have to worry about CO2 emissions.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think they're doing really good work. I've heard a little bit about it and the research that they've put in to, you know, get their project to scale. I've also heard some permitting issues with that one. But your question's a very all-encompassing question, and I don't want to, you know, pick a winner. You know, like, hey, this is one of the comments that I had at the very beginning. We don't have a darling. We don't have a solution that's like, thank God, let's all rally behind it, right? What we have is a system that is historically centralized biomass for the largest consumer demand, which is electricity. And that's known. We have that understanding, and we have markets to support that. What's problematic is that all of our existing fleet for bioenergy is outdated and based off technology that was created in 1910, combustion. So we're currently looking to advance that fleet, right? We aren't there yet. The technology is not ready. And if it was ready, you know, like we still have a lot of learning to do in order to make that commercially viable. And I actually have this, this great document that's called Financial Analysis of Innovative Wood Products and Carbon Finance to Support Forest Restoration in California. The great thing about this is that there's a lot of attention on it, and there's some incredible numbers when we're talking about, you know, benefit, return on investment. There's one, for example, if you were to make hydrogen from biomass and couple it with some state incentives, you have an internal rate of return of 153%. Is anyone an accountant here? Is anyone like able to communicate what that means? Is that impressive? That's pretty impressive, right? However, you know, once again, that's a long-term solution. Medium-term solution, and you know, we've had research address this. The Nature Conservancy has done a lot of work to say, like, okay, long-term solution, that's nice, but what do we need in the next 5 to 10 years in order to meet our pace and scale of restoration goals? And they said we need that known technology that containerize, it puts in chamber a combustion process that we can mitigate. We have emission control technologies that are able to reduce the particulate matter and all the other, you know, noxious VOx emissions down to 99%, 95%. What it doesn't control is carbon emissions, CO2. And that's problematic. But we have the ability to, you know, pretty much reduce and effectively eliminate all the other problematic particulate matter, the criteria pollutants that are problematic for our local regions. And when we're talking about the scale of the issue, right now we have a known technology with a known consumer demand that we can really, control and regulate. We're in California. This is the most highly regulated market state in the entire world for forest restoration, but also for air quality. We don't have air districts in other states. I mean, not all of them. But California has air districts that are required to regulate and permit certain facilities to operate within a certain threshold. So, bioenergy is complicated and controversial, and I'm not saying that's the solution, but it's something that we can work with right now in order to get us to that long-term ideal of hydrogen, renewable natural gas, biochar markets, because even though we can create biochar right now, we don't have necessarily consumer consumption demand for biochar that we would want in order to incentivize that. We also, we have, that's large scale thinking. We also have small scale thinking, the European model, the mixed product. We can use wood for so many different things. We can put it in streams. We can, cultivate mushrooms off of them. We can, we're working with manufacturers here in the region to look at and innovate with, how do we make wood wool cement? How do we, make a composite of the biomass material so that we can incorporate that into our housing stock instead of concrete. There's so many things that we can do, but we, once again, just have to figure out an intermediary entity that can communicate, negotiate between the land managers who are speaking a different language than the market developers. Does that help? Would you like to follow up on that? Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, thanks.
Can I just add one thing? Several years ago, I was part of a biomass convening. I think Martin from your shop was there. UC Berkeley pulled it together to talk about. And typically, as we all know in rural Northern California, when the state convenes things, the loudest voices in the room are the most populated areas. And when they are looking for solutions statewide, they tend to look for the one thing, that'll fix everything. And I was advocating, I don't know that it came out in the report, but we need local solutions. We need not just county, but even smaller than county solutions when it comes to biomass utilization. We need to not transport it from here to, Eureka or to Woodland or wherever. The big, I don't know in your stack there, if you have the report that was, talked about the mass megawatt biomass facilities, they all went out of business because of the contracting issue. And so we need to listen, the state needs to listen and put funding behind our small rural communities with unique ideas that work for the local community.
Hear, hear. Thank you. So, Eric, we have one final question from Eva Shepard-Nickel of ChicoStart.
With every idea that comes across my plate, which there is many, whether it has to do with biochar, green hydrogen, etc., it can also be utilizing this woody biomass for replacement of peat moss, believe it or not, which is hopefully going to be happening in Plumas County. The number one problem we run up against is who's going to transport it from point A to point B, because it's my understanding that I've heard, I don't know this, I haven't seen it in writing, that only 5 companies have the contracts to move stuff off the forest floor. Is that true? Or is what I've heard, this transportation issue, is that really the issue? I would love to get some feedback on that, please.
When you say move, you mean haul? Like distribution, like trucking?
Processing. Off the forest floor into wherever it's going to be processed.
Yeah. I'm thinking, because that might be true with hauling and distribution. I'm not as familiar with that, but the way that these third-party contractors operate on public lands is you have a timber operator doesn't have to be licensed, but they are a logger and they are a professional and they get hired through a bid process. And then they pass on the process to a subcontractor who's a hauler who hauls it off to a facility if the market's even available. And there are a number of third-party contractors. There are a lot of people who are participating in management of our public lands as well. So I'm not sure if there's 5. Maybe it's 5 in Lassen. I could see that being real, but Northern California. Yeah, I think you raise an additional point here that's like, even if there is 5, right? That's so little, right? And whether or not they've consolidated the market because they're good at their job, or there's a high barrier to start a logging business, which is very true, that needs to be addressed as well. And the fact, we didn't talk about logging or timber operation. Once again, is anyone personally affiliated with, has a family member, or professionally known for, with a timber operator here, like anyone, yeah, there's some people here, they could speak better to kind of the issues that loggers and trying to start a new logging business faces. I've heard anecdotally that it's really hard work and you don't get paid that much, and it can be difficult to constantly be traveling for these operations. So how do we improve that so that more people feel that they can be a part of the land management solution? And that's a big conversation. Hauling.
For the recording, Eva's comment was about the full supply chain.
I just wonder, for context, is that specifically, you said in Northern California, that's what you have heard? Do you know if it has anything to do with the CSAC's Golden State Initiative and their pilot programs that are bringing pellets?
Okay.
I haven't heard that, but now I'm curious.
I know some people who are going to find each other at the reception. Eric.
This might be a wonderful thing to bring to the CalForest meeting at some point, or Society of American Foresters, any of those groups. Okay, with that, thank you for all of you and your attention to this extended panel, and thank you to the organizers for giving us extra airtime to do this fun stuff. Thanks to these fabulous people. All right.